Hello, welcome back to my channel. I am Monet and you're watching Life is Monet. So I've been hearing this buzzword of cozy fantasy left and right for the past year, especially on BookTube, and I haven't read any. And I feel like I knew at some point I was going to want to pick up cozy fantasy, but it just did not have the sense of urgency for me because it feels like a book that you go into for all vibes and no plot, and I didn't know what I was really looking for in terms of a cozy fantasy and whether or not I would enjoy it. Now, of course, there's the staple cozy fantasy, which is Legends and Lattes, and I know that I wanted to read that book. I received it from Alana this holiday season to read, and I thought that it would be cool to do kind of like a research reading vlog where I actually went on Amazon and I looked up cozy fantasies and bought multiple so that I could read Legends and Lattes in comparison to something else that's also deemed a cozy fantasy. Now, ironically, or maybe not so ironically, but all of the books that we're going to read in this vlog are cozy fantasies written by indie authors. They just simply have the capacity to kick out books sooner before publishing can, and I know that Legends and Lattes started off as an indie publisher, so we will be reading Legends and Lattes in this vlog, of course. And then the second book that I grabbed is You Can't Spell Treason Without T by Rebecca Thorne. I still don't even know what cozy fantasy is, but this cover, it gives, okay? It's giving like little tea bookshop by the fireplace and a little chase chair, comfortable. It's giving comfortable for sure. The third book that I grabbed was The House Witch. This one has a very peculiar cover because it's not doing much to entice like a cozy feel, and there's really no characters on the cover, which is in contrast to Legends and Lattes and You Can't Spell Treason Without T. There's not a singular person on here. We get definitely like witchy vibes. There's a cat and a broom. It's giving household witchy vibes, but I don't know if it's saying cozy fantasy. And then the last book that I grabbed is not necessarily deemed cozy fantasy, but when I was doing a comparison between mainstream books that are deemed cozy fantasy, I've seen The Secret Society of Irregular Witches, The House in the Cerulean Sea. I've seen books that kind of have this wholesome and like low stakes plot storyline deemed cozy fantasy, even though they're not necessarily written like that. And so because of that, I wanted to find a book in the indie author realm that's similar, that's not necessarily deemed a cozy fantasy, but one that may fit the umbrella of cozy fantasy, especially because we're still like in the early stages of releasing cozy fantasy books and everyone's trying to find a book that fits within that aesthetic. And so I grabbed Keeper of Enchanted Rooms. Now this one definitely gives like, I think cozy fantasy vibes, only because it's another book that doesn't feature a person but has the house just kind of on the cover, and so it gives like a homey feel in the same way that The House Witch does. So these are going to be our 4 reads in this vlog, and we're basically out to determine what is cozy fantasy, what contributes being cozy fantasy, and is it for me? Do I even like cozy fantasy? Is there a plot? Are there stakes? Are there no stakes? Are there low stakes? I have so many questions about what to expect going into cozy fantasy, but right now I'm an entirely blank slate. I'm open to being impressed, and I'm open to being enlightened on what this new subgenre of fantasy is going to be. So I started Can't Spell Treason Without T. There is a cozy feel to the book. The writing is very simplistic. I literally started last night and flew through 125 pages just doing like sprints by myself, and so there is something that's very calming and soothing about it. I do wish that there was more like descriptions of T, because we have 2 characters, one of which is Raina, and she was the protector of the queen of this world, and the queen is very like brutal and vicious, and she thrives on brutality and violence. So we open the book with this assassin attempting to assassinate the queen, and Raina does her job to protect the queen, and she basically almost loses her life. And Raina's just like, you know what? Me and my girlfriend have hypothetically talked about running away from our obligations and starting this bookshop that sells tea in this remote town in the middle of nowhere. And just the obligations have been preventing them from doing it. And Raina is just, I don't know, I guess a little nervous or apprehensive about the idea. But after she like almost dies for the umpteenth time, saving the queen's life, and the queen is just so unbothered and like grateful for what she did, she's like, you know what, I'm gonna run away. So she literally just wakes up the next day and she like hauls ass. And so her girlfriend is a mage. Chianti is a mage of all mages, so she's like this leader wizard, I guess. Technically, they're both doing risky business because the queen, if she discovers Rhaena's treason or treachery, she will have her killed. And then also, Chianti was chosen as this lead mage by this ancient stone. And so it transcends just having this job. It's not like a political appointment. It is something that she has kind of been like anointed to do. And there is some stakes to the book, which I didn't really expect. I thought that like maybe Rhaena would like retire and go somewhere, but she literally forsakes all her duties. And so if they were to get caught on Rhaena's behalf, it is a very dangerous thing. On top of that, from the conflict of the assassin attempt, Rhaena has inflicted wounds on her body that are technically fatal. And so there feels like there is stakes to the book. Like they've run into near death experiences more time than you would think. And then also there is this secrecy kind of looming over their head. They don't really know who they can trust, who they can be like transparent and open with, because you don't know how much information is going to make it back to the queen. On top of that, Chianti is like kind of pretending that she can move away from like the location where all the sorceress lives, and that she can just live in this remote island and just travel back and forth. And you're just like, can you do that though? Because one, your charging and like channeling of this magic actually comes from the location where the magic carry is, and so you're constantly depleted in this remote land that you guys are trying to set up the shop. And then also, like, how long can you expect to go until you are like obligated to travel back to the magic carry? And how long can you travel back and forth this like great distance? I don't know. It's just like they literally just hauled ass from all of their obligations, and I find this like amusing. I think the idea of having danger lurking behind a corner, or constantly having to look over your shoulder or question who you can trust, adds danger and stakes to the story. There really isn't a plot because their entire goal is to take this old barn and to turn it into a bookshop that sells tea. And so they're slowly working towards this, and I think that that kind of like contributes this calming aspect to the story, because you're just like, okay, I want you guys to be happy, I want to enjoy this relationship between you two, and I want to see you thrive by opening this bookshop. And everyone's kind of like excited to have this, but at the same time, like, I don't know if this is going to be like a happily ever after, or you guys are just really desperate for a happy for now situation. I don't know. I'll come back when I have additional thoughts on the book, but I will say that, like, again, it's a very easy read. It is a bit calming, and I think that if you're not sure if cozy low stakes fantasies is for you, then maybe start here, because it's low stakes if they don't get caught. If they do, it quickly becomes high stake. It quickly becomes survival skills. You know what I'm saying? Like, it quickly goes to the left. But as long as they can fly under the radar, their biggest concern is turning an old barn into a tea shop. Tonight, I am doing sprints with myself by my fireplace. I have set up my ambiance. I have a bit of lo-fi music going on in the background. I have my timers up on my TV. I have my lovely fireplace by the side of me. We're like down to the wire on winter, and luckily for me, where I still live, it's still a bit cold outside. We're still like in 35, 40-degree weather, so I'm gonna use the rest of my firewood logs while I still can, and this fire literally is the last of my wood logs. I have a bit of an ostentatious goal for tonight, but it feels very doable. I have officially reached halfway in Can't Spell Treason Without Tea, but my goal is to read until I only have 100 pages left in the book. So I think I would need to read about 80 pages of Can't Spell Treason without T, which feels very doable. And then I need to read 50 pages in Half a Soul because I'm actually buddy reading this with a friend, and I am incredibly behind schedule because they're so close to finishing and I'm only 100 pages into the book. So I'm not that far behind, but I definitely am not being a good buddy read partner right now. I did manage to get the audiobook for The House Witch, and so once I knock out 80 plus 50, the 130 pages of those two books that I need to read, we'll be moving on to The House Witch, which I'll be listening to via audio, and hopefully we make some progress. It's just me and myself and my own vibes tonight, and I'm a mood. This book has gender non-binary representation, and that character is pretty central to the plot. There is quite a bit of queer representation. We've even like hinted at the gender non-binary character having a possible romantic love interest, which is a book that I feel like I would read because it would certainly be like a hate to love kind of romance. What I don't think is working for me is that I want more atmosphere. I want more descriptions of tea. I want you to walk me through some type of imported herbal blend straight from the core of the earth steeping process, and I want you to describe the aromas. I want you to describe that first taste, the aftertaste, what you season it with, and like anything from agave to honey to some type of special crystallized cube sugar. And I'm not getting that. And I know that that's not something that everybody would enjoy. And so, like, if I take away my disappointment in that aspect, this is a pretty good book. It's calm, it's relaxing, it has some type of stakes, there is some type of danger, but it's so far out of the reader's mind that sometimes you forget that, this could possibly be a life or death situation. And the two characters that we're following, Reina and Chianti, they are both dealing with quite a bit of like insecurities and uncertainty around being with each other because they dated for a year, but they were stuck in two different like geographical locations. And so when they decided to run away and start this bookshop that sells tea, or this tea shop that also sells books, I think that's the correct order to put it, this was like their first like jump together consistently. And I think it's realistic to include certain moments where they feel like they don't deserve each other or they need like extra reassurance, and they both take that mantle so seriously. Like whenever a sarcastic comment is said or one of them explains an insecurity, the other is like dropping everything to reassure them and make them feel loved and wanted and supported. And it's a scary thing to venture out like this, and neither one of them wants the other to regret that choice or to back out of it. And I think that's also important too, because you don't want them to like get scared and like leave or give up quickly. And even though technically neither one of them have actually thought about giving up, they're still very afraid that the other person's going to give up. And so I enjoy the representation of the relationship in here. And I think the only thing that I'm missing is that I want a little more atmosphere. Bore me to death with descriptions of tea in books that you're reading. Like, read some books and then describe the books to me in a book that I'm reading. That's what I want. The mage in here, Chianti, has elemental magic, and so that means she can control fire, water, earth, air, things like that. And there was this dragon attack. This is a bit of a spoiler, but I find this fire. She hopped onto the dragon's back as it was about to spit fire on this town, and she pulled the fire towards the dragon. Instead of it projecting outward, she pulled the fire back in, and it has incinerated the inside of this dragon, which I just think, like, logistically, I have questions. If we suspend our disbelief, never seen this before. Never seen this before. Why had this never happened before? We've had dragons and earthbenders and firebenders or earth weavers in fantasies before. Why has no one ever pulled the dragon's fire back down its throat the other way? I don't know if this is scientifically logical. Probably not. But I'm here for it. I'm really here for that poor dragon. Rest in peace to that dragon. It has to be dead. But interesting. Interesting. Has been pretty successful. It's now officially like 2 o'clock in the morning, so I'm going to go to bed. But I did manage to read slash kind of listen to 50 pages of The House Witch. And let me tell you, this is my type of cozy fantasy. Like, if this is what cozy fantasy is, then, put my card on an account, give me an open tab because I'm going to run up a check. I need more books like this. This is feeling like it's going to be a 5-star read, and I am surprised because I did not expect that going into this. So let me tell you what this book is about. First of all, we have this character that his name is Finn, or Finn Lee, but he goes by Finn, and he shows up to this castle where this queen and king live, of course, and he's the new cook, and no one knows who he is, where he came from, what he did before, but he's relatively young, and he's abrasive, he's abrupt, he's short, he's rude, he doesn't want to be friends with anybody, and he just wants to like have his layout. You know what I'm saying? He wants to be in his element in this kitchen, and he wants everybody to get the hell out. And everyone's kind of shocked because like the kitchen was like kind of like this hangout spot, and seeing how the castle operates from the eyes of like, or the lens of the kitchen, was so interesting, of like all the different servants coming in and out preparing dinner and breakfast and lunch for the king and queen, and the different events that they were doing. Like, that was pretty interesting, like, anyway. But the descriptions of the food is totally here, not just from Finn when he's cooking, but literally like the king when he's eating. I'm gonna read you guys this section where the king is talking. He's like, "The steak tonight nearly made me weep. I have never had meat fall apart in my mouth like that." And the other character's like, "I agree. I wonder how in the world he gets the potatoes so creamy." Not to mention the dill sauce. Lee half groaned and half moaned as he recalled the creamy sauce that he would have eaten straight out of the pitcher. It was so diabolically delicious. The two continued discussing their favorite meals made by Finn for at least another hour before they retired to their chambers, each one already hungry for breakfast the next day. So, Finn is in that kitchen. He's doing the damn thing. And I don't care if Finn is out here, hurting people's feelings because he's not conversational. He's not social. It's just him and his cat in this kitchen whipping up fucking magic, and I'm on Finn's side. I got Finn's back. Like, they're literally having conversations about what Finn is doing in this kitchen because it's magical, baby. And everyone else is starting to get like, a little offended that Finn doesn't want to be their friends. But he, it is what it is. He has a familiar, which is a cat, and he thinks he's hiding the fact that he's a witch because he doesn't, like, he's not a friendly person, but he also doesn't want anyone to know that he has magic. And what I think is like the most interesting in terms of the world building, because it's really there. We have mages and we have witches. And there's a literal explanation of like how that came to be. The beef goes back thousands of years. And so there is a powerful mage in the castle, but like Finn doesn't fuck with him. And the mage kind of doesn't fuck with him either, and that just has to do with the idea that like there's this goddess who awarded witches their elemental affinities to magic, and that's like the natural order of things. And then there's a small like excerpt of backstory where instead of someone getting their magic from the goddess, which is why everyone is called a witch even when they're a male, they're not called warlocks because it's like feminine magic. This god ended up awarding like magical abilities to like this next line of people, and so they kind of became mages. And the setup is different because mages, like, they go to a school, they study for years, they're not bounded to like one element or one affinity. However, witches, like, magic comes to them naturally, and so they kind of see mages as this like disruption to the natural order of things, kind of like an abomination. This one is very different from You Can't Spell Treason Without T, because that one is so much more like settling, cozy, like quick, easy read. This one is more steeped in like storytelling, and it has more of like a homely feel. It is cozy because it's comforting, and the fact that like the storytelling is done in such a classic like fantasy way. I would say the storytelling is very similar to like A Series of Misfortunate Events, the movies, or Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, where you have like this narrator that's kind of like dipping into the mundane like slice of life things that everyone's doing, and you're moving throughout like this world with different characters. And so it just is comforting in that way, because if you're someone like me that loves those kind of stories, then this is going to be like such a hug of a read. I am glad that I grabbed the audio of this one, because I'm reading so many other books physically, but this is one that like I'm so excited for, and I'm so so like interested to keep going, and I would hate to like have to wait and like put this down until I finish my other books. It's definitely been an interesting journey so far into cozy fantasy, but we've started 2 of the 4 books that we're going to read in this vlog, and I'm interested. I feel like this may be my era. This may be what I need. I should have, like, I don't know. Of course, there's gonna be other fantasies, like cozy fantasies out there. But if there's a sequel to The House Witch, I'm definitely going to order that ASAP. But it's one I'll probably save to read like this fall or like this winter. I'm glad that I'm getting everything I wanted in terms of like the descriptions of food and drinks in The House Witch, because now I'm like, okay, you know, that's really what I wanted. I don't know what tomorrow's gonna look like, but hopefully I can finish You Can't Spell Treason Without T and get a good chunk, maybe even halfway into The House Witch. But hopefully tomorrow we can like finish a book, get halfway through one book, and start another one. That's our goal. I'm back. We got action, people. Did I accomplish everything that I set out to do today? Yes and no, sorta. It's 3 o'clock in the morning of the next day, and I said that I wanted to finish Can't Spell Treason Without T. Did I do that? Yes, I did. I also said that I wanted to reach 50% in The House Witch. Did I do that? Almost. I am like 25 pages away from being halfway through this. I also said that I wanted to start another book. Did I do that? No, I did not. No, I did not. But there's always tomorrow, which is technically today after I go to sleep and wake up again. Back to Can't Spell Treason Without T. I think that if I had to think of adjectives to describe this book, it would probably be like, it's reassuring, it's optimistic, it's self-discovery, it's queer lesbian vibes all the way through, and there's just a general like queer normality to multiple characters throughout the stories, and where we end up with the gender non-binary character and their potential love interest is very open. And so it made me wonder if, you know, maybe the next book or the sequel would follow them. And the sequel is actually out already. It came out just a few months ago, but in that one we're following a pirate, or she's like a failed farmer turned pirate, and her ex-best friend is the like sheriff of this town who has been appointed with going and arresting her, and their childhood friends turned enemies, but they're also in love with each other. So that one's going to be queer as well. So it looks like book 1 is featuring lesbians, book 2 features lesbians. I don't know if there's going to be a book 3, but my guess from how open-ended the plot like resolution was in this book is that there will be a book 3, and like maybe possibly we'll be following the gender non-binary character. But to see a cozy fantasy series feature such gender fluid characters, it's just really fun for me. And I was nervous before about like how we were gonna do this climax for the book, because again, like the queen, if she finds Raina, she's going to kill her because she committed treason by leaving. And of course we get to that point in the book. I'm not gonna say like that is anticlimactic, but it's definitely just like a tense situation, and they escape it with like ingenuity versus like violence and war, if that makes any sense. And so it felt like lower stakes, like they just kind of like maneuvered out of a situation in a very sly way, which probably contributes to why it's considered like a low stakes cozy fantasy. Final thoughts on Can't Spell Treason Without T. I feel like if I was to describe this book, right, let's set the stage. We have a protector and like a personal guardsman of this tyrant queen, and she wants more influence outside her nation's borders. And so this powerful mage that's also the leader of like this next nation, she wants to use her personal guard to like sway her, like get them into a romantic relationship, and use her personal guard as a way to like wield power and influence over this mage. And what if those two people, instead of being caught up in this kingdom with like political machinations and trying to maneuver and keep their relationship secret and all those kind of, like, what if they said to hell with it and they just ran away and opened a bookshop that sells tea? That's what this book is. It is an alternate story, or like an alternate version of what would be like your typical stock fantasy, because if they had not run away and we were like set in this world with the same stakes but within the kingdom, and it wasn't like so much emphasizing being a cozy fantasy, it would technically be like your typical adult fantasy series. I kind of feel like it reads very young because so much of, actually all of the intimate sexual moments happen off the page. Like there's a reference to it, there's like small flirtatious, like salacious moments, but there is no sexual activity happening on page within the story. There's like a few curse words, but other than that, like other than the curse words in the story, this is very like much clean, honestly. There's not a lot of like blood and death on page. This is very much just, you know, I wouldn't call it like fan fiction, but it's just like the dream of like, I wish we could just run away. And like, what if we did? Boom. You can't spell treason without T. That's what this book is. Will I be continuing with the next book? I definitely will, because I'm interested to see if we're going to get a little bit more atmosphere and like descriptive language now that we're like dealing with a pirate who is like at sea. But who knows, because it looks like this book was, the author put in the back of the book that they were inspired to write this series based off Legends and Lattes, which I'm kind of glad that I read this book first, and I had no reference to Legends and Lattes, so I won't be able to do a comparison until we get to that book later in the vlog. But this was definitely directly inspired from Legends and Lattes. And yeah, I can't recommend enough queer cozy fantasies. How is that not a vibe, you know? Even though I did not reach technically like 50% in the book, I'm at like 47%, which is technically like 50%. So like today was successful, you know? Even though I'm not where I technically want to be, I do want to give an update that I'm still enjoying this. I'm still having a good time. We have a female character, Anika, that we follow, and there is this slight attraction between Anika and Finn, but Anika is like this viscountess, and so she is essentially like a duchess, a baroness, a lordess. I don't know what that, listen, I don't do the feudal system, okay? I can't remember all the different statures in the feudal system, but she is a lady of stature and reputation and power and influence, and she just kind of keeps getting under Finn's skin, and they have this slight attraction to one another. But Finn is, one, again, not the most friendly person. Two, he can be like a little abrupt and rude, but she seems not to be thwarted by that, and she's quick-lipped too, and so like she comes back with, you know, cheeky, snarky remarks back at him. And like Finn has like a bit of a gooey side to him. Like he's first he's sour and then he's sweet. That's the only way that I can really describe him. He's like crunchy and then gooey in the center, because so much is happening in this kingdom. And Finn is just this cook. And like, again, I gotta hark back to what I mentioned earlier, that witnessing like everything that you're used to seeing in like from central characters in a fantasy, where like there's drama going on, there's political intrigue going on, there's the possibility of war and spies, and you know, everybody scheming to do this thing and that thing, but witnessing it from the cook side and the cook's perspective, like having that distance, I'm just really enjoying. And then also I just feel like Finn is just such a compelling character to follow all the way through. But he kind of keeps getting roped up and involved in situations because he is who he is. And one thing that I really love is that the knights in this story are assholes. They're misogynistic, they're a bit homophobic, they're rude, and they try to bully Finn, and Finn really stands his ground, and everyone kind of becomes a little afraid of Finn and like his reprimandation of their actions. And so the knights of this kingdom are actually starting to behave better. And there's like this moment in the story where they're like, oh, we were gonna do this thing that we know we wasn't supposed to do because it would have made you mad, and we don't want to make you mad because like you're a bit scary. And Finn like laid into their ass, and like, just because you're doing something or you're not doing something that you know is bad because you're afraid of me, that doesn't make you a good fucking person. Like, you need to not do it because you know that it's wrong. Like, I'm not gonna give you cookies and gold stars because you didn't do something out of fear of what I would say. Like, that's not what so it's beautiful to watch Finn affect everyone's life and kind of like change their perspectives, and everyone's growing and learning more about themselves. And you know, there's so much character development just from Finn alone, and so he keeps getting roped up in different situations even though he technically does not want to be involved in them at all. I am like a little daunted by how long the story is, but I'm having a good time. And so like, I can complain that the book is too long, but it's not doing anything to take away my enjoyment. It's just a long book. But so is fantasies, right? Fantasies are meant to be long books. And so if you do a cozy fantasy, I'm okay if like you still stay within your domain and you make it like a long book. Anyways, I'll be back tomorrow and hopefully I will have started another book. I feel like since this one was inspired by Legends and Lattes, I should pick that one up next while I still am ripe with my emotions and perspectives on Can't Spell Treason Without T. And then the last book we'll read is The Keeper of Enchanted Rooms, which I haven't read the synopsis for that one just yet, but I expect it to be a little like The House in the Cerulean Sea or A Very Secret Society of Regular Witches. That's like the vibes that I'm getting from the title and like the cover of the book. But I could just be very much postulating because I really don't know what the fuck that book is about. So we'll be back. Progress has been made, people. First, I managed to finish The House Witch. This was so enjoyable for me for a myriad of reasons. Finley instantly endeared himself to me as a character. I really enjoyed following him, learning more about him and the history that he has with his father and how much of a tyrant he was and how that led to Finley just wanting to be this reserved person and being a little bit bitter towards the world and not having healthy relationships with other people. Finley is very much a reluctant hero, and because his magic is tied to the household, providing stability to it and also making those within the household more comfortable, it's harder for him to have those restrictions around himself and those barriers to relationships when he lives in a castle. There's so many people that live in a castle that he just has these involuntary connections with, and he's forced outside of his own like parameters and boundaries because he is such a like grudgingly sentimental person, and he's a good friend and he's a protector. And it was just really fun to be in a proverbial fantasy setting because you get to see potential wars coming forth, the political dynamics between the king and the queen and the viscounts and all these different things, but you're seeing it from like lower tier staff, and it's just nice to have that distance and that perspective. When Anika is forced to kind of make a marriage arrangement for political gain, Finley doesn't really know what to do with that, and so he starts spiraling, and because his magic is tied to the household, he starts spiraling in a way that brings instability to the household and kind of like ropes everybody in. And so he is definitely the thread that weaves throughout all the different relationships within the castle, and I really enjoyed that. This wasn't like a 5-star read the way that I anticipated that it was going to be, because the like latter third half of the book really lost me. I feel like the author was having as much fun in their own world as we were, and they were so comfortable there that I feel like they just kind of lost the movement and the progress within the story. It almost felt like the author did not want the book to end, and that they just kind of cut the story off because enough pages had been reached, and they just was like, okay, we're gonna cut this off right here. And so the ending feels rather abrupt, and it doesn't have a conclusive ending or feel like you would think that we were building up towards throughout the story. I will continue with the series, but because of the way that the book ended, it almost felt as though the author did not adequately use their time with the readers. And I am taking into account that this is a debut novel by an indie author. I just feel like there is a responsibility to the author to ensure enough payoff from the engagement. Like once you get everyone engaged within the story and you're building up to a climax, it is a responsibility to make sure that when the book ends, they walk away with something lingering behind and they feel like it was time valued and that their time was respected. And there's just something about the way the latter half of the book got really muddled, and then we had this really cut off ending that felt like, okay, I feel like you kind of took advantage of the fun that we were having and the patience that we were giving. With that being said, there's still so much more to the story that I haven't necessarily mentioned to you guys. So if it's something that you were thinking about checking out, I definitely would, because I have only begun to scratch the surface of all the things that have happened in this book in terms of the plot and the character relationships. I've only talked about what was relevant to like my enjoyment and also the feels to contributing to cozy fantasies, but I definitely feel like I need to do a more thorough, in-depth review of the book and everything that happened within the story so that you guys can have a full picture. Ultimately though, I still feel like that may be my favorite read within the vlog. It's a little too early to tell, but my money's on The House Witch. I did manage to start Legends and Lattes, and I tried to start it via audio. And there is nothing wrong with that audiobook, except that there's just something so easily ignorable about his voice for me. And I would hit play and like tell my brain to focus, and it was given severe ADHD. It wasn't working. And so I ex-nayed that. I had to go back and just start reading the book physically, and I had a much more enjoyable time. I was more engaged with the story as I was reading on. So we open the book with Viv, who has just attacked and killed this beast, and all of a sudden just gets this epiphany that they are done with this life and they're gonna leave and just start a coffee shop. Now this is really peculiar because they have never heard of really coffee except for one time when they were in this town and coffee was being served and they were like amazed and wowed by it. But coffee feels like something that's very specific to that geographic location, because when Viv actually travels to the town where she would like to open up her coffee shop, everyone is hitting her with questions of like, what even is coffee? So everybody is just as thrown off as she was before she was introduced to coffee. Up front, one of my complaints about the story is that there is very little character building for Viv. We don't get any backstory snippets. We don't get any details. We literally just hop into the car with Viv in the driver's seat and we're watching Viv go through physical actions of opening up a coffee shop and having conversations with individuals. And besides the fact that you're aware that she's just done living the typical life of an orc, there's really nothing else of substance to her to build up her character and to make her feel like she's real. And so that's creating a barrier for me in terms of really connecting with her, because we have no details about her. I'm officially almost halfway, I would say. I'm on page 125 and the book is like less than 300 pages. So I am pretty well within the story. And there is one slight mystery behind the final like monster that she killed. She ended up taking something from the scene and you get the idea that this is relevant in some way, but that's literally it. We have had instances where people that used to be a part of her team when she was living a dangerous life come back within the story, but they're not having real conversations of substance either. And so it's not giving me any more insight into Viv's life. I am hopeful that that is going to change the deeper that I get into the book, but because the book is so short and I have already made such a big dent in it, I don't know if we're gonna have much more progress in that area. We also have like just started opening the coffee shop, and so I can't speak to like the very descriptive language. Oddly enough, when they were like fixing up this horse shed to turn into a cafe, the descriptions of like lifting wood and sawdusting and like restructuring and like buttressing this building was comfortable for me. I never thought that I would enjoy descriptions of wood and nails and lumber, but it worked for me in an odd sense. So who am I to complain about it? My goal is to do private sprints by myself and finish Legends and Lattes tonight after I cook dinner and things like that. And that feels very tangible. Like a creamy chicken and spinach pasta, and I have a sweet tooth tonight, so I also baked some cookies. Tonight is the night of reading, so I want to make sure I have my setup for Legends and Lattes. It's midnight. I've officially finished Legends and Lattes. It was such a quick read, and for that I'm very grateful. My only complaint about the story is still what I mentioned earlier. I feel like Viv is only developed enough to not be this looming hole in the story. I don't feel like we get enough individual characteristics or nuance to Viv's character or really learn about the things that make Viv Viv. We are told about the lifestyle that she gave up, but we never really go into detail over what about it exactly made her fed up with it. Was there a certain moment, or like, I don't know, we just don't get that deep dive into her emotional and mental state that I feel like would have made her a more three-dimensional type of character. There is minimal character development once you see Viv and her romantic interest start to develop a relationship with each other. There is a little bit of like insight into her vulnerabilities, but it still feels a little stoic and a little distant, and I wanted a little more. I wanted to get to know her more outside of just walking away from the lifestyle that she had. I understand that she did that, but she didn't walk away from that world a blank canvas. Viv still is a person with a ton of life experience, and I wanted to see that show through in the book. Other than that, I understand the hype. Ironically enough, there is a excerpt in the back of the book called Pages to Fills, and it's a Legends and Latte type of story. And we do get to see an episode in Viv's life before the start of this book. I just really enjoy having a mental and emotional check-in with my characters, and I don't feel like we got that in this book at all. It is now time for our final book, Keeper of Enchanted Rooms. It's admittedly been a few days since I've updated this vlog. My week for reading has just, it's going very slow. Not that I have a problem with that. There's just some times where I can consume books in mass amounts, and then there's just sometimes where my brain is like, okay, enough, we need to slow down. And this is just one of those weeks. The audiobook for this book is really good, but I also think that I'm in an audiobook reading slump, which is something that's very common for me. It happens very often. If I go into a reading slump, it is usually via a certain format. Like, I am tired of reading physically, or I'm tired of reading via ebook. But the most common type of reading slump for me is an audiobook reading slump, and that's just kind of where I am. So while I wish that I could enjoy this book via audio, I constantly find that like I will listen to a chapter and I will have to like stop it and go back and physically read, and I can just move through the book much quicker when I am physically reading it. By the way, I'm talking about The Keeper of Enchanted Rooms. I totally forgot to tell you guys what I'm reading. It's the last book in this vlog, reading that one. And for one, it is the best written book that I've read so far in the vlog. I'm not going to say I didn't expect this level of writing. It was just a pleasant surprise, I guess. So Merritt has been estranged from his family for the last decade or so. After 13 years of dead silence and no contact, we find out that his grandmother has passed and she left Merritt a house. So here's this random house that was owned by his family that no one has physically lived in for 100 years. And he's in a bit of a housing predicament, so he's like, sure, I'll go to the house and I will think about selling it or maybe living there. He's expecting that because there's been no one in the home for over 100 years, it might be falling apart and dilapidated. Now, the world itself, we're set up in kind of this alternate history where in the 19th century and magic is a thing, but because of just diluted bloodlines, people who contain magic or have magic are not as strong as they used to be. Of course, there's still some inbreeding within the royal lines to try to keep the magic as strong as possible, but there are 11 schools of magic, and so it's basically saying like it's not just like you have all magic, like there's 11 different types and all of them have different attributes, but also they suffer like consequences and like resulting illnesses whenever they use it. So I can't remember exactly, but if you have like chaocracy for magic, which is like you can either create chaos or create disorder, I think the side effect of using that would be like nausea or like insomnia or something like that. So like it's a very cool magic system. So Mary gets to this island and the house is in excellent shape. When he goes inside, he realizes that the house is imbued with magic. The house is basically sentient and alive, and when he tries to leave, the house will not let him. So this house reminds me a lot of Thistlefoot, which is a retelling of like modern day Baba Yaga descendants, and the house in that one was so much fun. It was so alive and it was like so humorous. The house in this book is alive in the same way, except it is bitter, it is angry, it is dangerous, it is doing everything it can to scare Merritt. It is making blood drip from the walls. There was one time where he was like stuck in this bathroom and he's like trying to push himself out, and so he's beating against the door. And then the house kind of like alters the door to where spikes come out so that like if he throws himself into the door again, he's gonna like impale himself. So the house is like upset, like it's choosing violence every day of the week, and I'm really enjoying, like, I don't know what the reasoning behind this house being so angry with him or just in general is, but the house is petty, it's childish, okay, and it's throwing tantrums left and right. So there is this like biker organization, which is like the Keeper of Enchanted Rooms. It's people who understand magic or have magic themselves that go around and like bringing things like magical houses into order when they are acting like this, and ensuring that when someone who doesn't have magic inherits a magical artifact or some type of magical thing, that they know how to coexist in the same space. So this organization sends out Hulda, and she is living with Merritt to help him get get this house in order. And Merritt is convinced that like there's something more to this house. Like it might even be haunted, but Hulda is just like, it's just a temperamental house that hasn't had a tenant in over 100 years. So it has lost all form of decorum, and it doesn't have like those social like behavioral skills that a house typically would have if they were like housing tenants on a regular basis. But one of the most interesting things to the book is that there is another POV that we follow. It's a character who's very powerful with magic. His name is Silas. He has an abusive father, and he does something pretty extreme in the beginning of the book, and you see him spiral, and he is so paranoid and so self-conscious about like a power dynamic between him and other people that he has relationships with. He never wants to feel like how his father made him feel, which is like powerless. And so he's constantly trying to think of ways and theories and methods to make sure that no one can ever have power over him again. And so he's doing very extreme acts of desperation, and you really have no idea what he in the past has to do with Merritt and Hulda. And I'm waiting to see how those two POVs is going to kind of converge. But so far, like while Merritt and Hulda is interesting, I think that having this extra POV of someone just kind of descending into magical chaos and you don't know what connection they have to the story is building up like this excitement, and it's making the story that much more interesting because I actually really enjoy both POVs. We get Hulda's perspective, we get Merritt's perspective, and then we also get this third like magical Silas perspective. I'm enjoying it. It is like slowly creeping up there to like my most enjoyable read in the vlog, and that is probably the most unexpected of all. We have officially reached the end of the vlog. I have finished Keeper of Enchanted Rooms, and probably what is the biggest, most unexpected twist in this video is that I gave this 5 stars. In terms of enjoyment, I enjoyed The House Witch so much more. It appealed to my emotions. The characters are more, they just felt more connected to me and the type of characters that I love reading in stories. And so even though this is not a perfect book by any means, and there's a lot of things that I could critique about the story, I still wholly enjoyed it, and it's probably my favorite comfort fantasy read that I've done in this vlog. However, Keeper of Enchanted Rooms is objectively a 5-star read because I have nothing bad to say about it. The pacing of this book was perfect. The rollout of the story was perfect. The characters were fully developed, fully fleshed out. The romance was slow and creeping, but when it came front and center into the story, I was really invested. In fact, this is probably the only third act breakup that I have ever enjoyed. Like when we got to the point where they were, you know, at each other's throats and the things that they were saying, I was literally gasping. That's how invested I was in the romance. Even though I typically hate unnecessary third act breakups, I feel like the revealing of the surprising like secret parts to the story came at the perfect timing because it's set right before the climax, and so you feel a sense of comfort after having had that revealing aspect to know that these characters are going to somehow make it through whatever's happening in the story. Even though you don't know exactly how they're going to do that, there is a bit of reassurance that comes to the reader before. And so I think that this one, even though it's not necessarily deemed a cozy fantasy, I would argue that like you get a sense of security and reassurance even before the climax, but also it's still a low stakes story in general. So yeah, this one objectively was 5 stars. I will certainly be continuing on with the series. I think that I would pick up book 2 of everything that I've read in this vlog. I feel like the one that would take me the longest to get to would probably be Legends and Lattes and the sequel that's coming out sometime soon. I don't have the release date in my mind, but only because the characters in that one was just not as fleshed out as I would like them to be, and I'm a character driven reader, and that one was all about like aesthetics and vibes, and that's cool, but like I want to have a cool setting and I want to vibe with the characters, and I feel like that one just compared to the other 3 here kind of fell flat. If I was going to rank them, let's see how we can do this. I'm gonna put The Keeper of Enchanted Rooms at the top, and then immediately after comes The House Witch in the number 2 spot. In hindsight, I feel like You Can't Spell Treason Without T would come in 3rd, and unfortunately Legends and Lattes, don't kill me because I know how you girls like to tussle, would come in last in this video, but only by comparison to the other books that I enjoy so much more. Summing up my entire experience reading all of these books, I've learned so much more about the genre that will come to be cozy fantasy, because I feel like it's still very much just getting started. Indie authors have the advantage of getting a book out to print and out to the masses in a much quicker way than we can expect from publishing. And so my expectation is that it's still going to be about a year or maybe even a year and a half before we start getting hit with a lot of mainstream pushing cozy fantasies. But in the meantime, I prefer indie authors in terms of their writing, because just in generally indie authors typically do a better job of fleshing out characters because they can take the time to invest in them more and make them very distinguishable. I am going to be looking forward to seeing what books make it to publishing and what type of cozy fantasies they push out, if they're going to be more heavy on aesthetics. And that brings me to the next point. I need very descriptive language. I've mentioned this earlier in the vlog. I need you to appeal to the 5 senses of myself in order for me to consider something a cozy read. I want to be able to visualize and see what you're describing. I want to feel like I can smell it, like I can feel it, like I can taste it. I need you to appeal to me, and I need your writing to transcend just what's being described in the book. And there's a lot of pressure on that. I feel like just in general, but also for me as a reader, there's a lot of pressure for you to bring something to life just with descriptive language and not overdoing it. And so still, that's an area that I feel like I'm always going to be a little harsher in terms of critiquing. And unfortunately, I feel like not everybody's going to make the cut. The next point would be, what is considered low stakes fantasy, and does low stakes and no stakes make a difference? Like, are you going into your cozy fantasies because you just are there for like no plot, all vibes? Because if that's the case, things like The Starless Sea, that's literally all vibes, absolutely no plot. You're just there to be there, but it's not considered a cozy fantasy for a multitude of reasons. But it is a book that I consider absolutely plotless. Honestly, The Night Circus is another book that I would consider plotless, and maybe even would be deemed cozy dark fantasy, but that's a conversation for another day. I think that in general, there needs to be something that not only the characters are working towards in a plot, but also there needs to be this culmination of like some type of character hurdle that they're jumping through that is going to make you feel like they have grown on this journey of like self-discovery and self-love and all these different things. And I feel like that's still a delicate balance to be like, okay, you're going to give us some type of climax in the story, and how are you going to make sure that it's still low stakes, or that it doesn't take away from the cozy, comfortable feels that we've had throughout a story? I don't know. I just feel like there's a lot of things to cozy fantasies that have yet to be discovered. And I am a venturer. I'm on the front end. And so I'll be consuming more books and making comparisons as we go along. And so because we are closing out this vlog only having read what is considered cozy fantasy by indie authors, comment down below if you want to see me do this again for books that are kind of considered or dubbed cozy fantasy but have been mainstream published. Let me know if you want me to do a separate like follow-up vlog and doing a comparison from what indie authors are doing so far, and then what technically wouldn't be cozy fantasy because it's not the marketing in which the book was released, but still is labels that people are giving to it, and it kind of fits into what cozy fantasy is. Thank you guys for watching my video. If you have made it to the end, leave me a little mug emoji, and I will see you in the next one.